All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm Cosima Sagmeister, and I'm one of the co-leads of the Women in Green Hydrogen events team, and I'll be moderating the panel. But just before we start, I wanted to say a few words about the network, about WIG, which is a network that works to empower women by providing networking opportunities, training, and mentoring. And we do this, well, for one, because we want to help women to have successful and fulfilling careers in the sector. But not only because of that, but also because we are convinced that the energy transition needs diversity of perspectives and of opinions. And so I want to invite all of you that are here now to engage in a dialogue with us, but also with your colleagues and your peers, and to drive forward this mission, to drive forward gender equality in the sector, and to work on this together. But now let's dive into today's panel. So, well, we've all been made painfully aware in the past years how important resilient global supply chains are. And while the energy transition will help us to reduce some dependencies on non-renewable resources, we will also need more of other materials, and critical raw materials are really the key word here. According to the EU, these are materials that are very important for the economy, but also have high supply chain risks. And we will need a lot of them for green technologies, and green hydrogen is no exception to that. For green hydrogen, we speak especially about platinum group metals, PGMs, such as iridium, for instance, which will be very important. And geographically, they occur all over the world, but there are some major deposits in countries such as South Africa, Zimbabwe, North America, but also Russia. But the supply chains, they are global. That means that mining, processing, refining, end use, and recycling, it's really spread all over the world. And so it's really important, of course, that we have resilient supply chains while we ramp up supply very quickly. But on the other side of the coin, because we have the need to ramp up so quickly and by so much, we need to make sure that this ramp up is done so in an equitable way. It shouldn't increase inequalities, and it shouldn't increase unsustainable development. So, well, that's some of the things that we will speak about now. And I'm joined by three great panelists. Let me introduce them to you. So we have next to me Irina Gorbounova, who is Vice President of M&A and Head of the XCarb Innovation Fund at ArcelorMittal. And her work focuses on funding investments in companies that develop breakthrough technologies to decarbonize steel. Then we have Petra Schwager on the very left, who is the Chief of the Climate and Technology Partnerships at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, and she also heads UNIDO's global program for green hydrogen in industry. And then we have in the middle Elizabeth Minchew, who is a research officer at the International Finance Corporation, and her current portfolio covers identifying opportunities for green hydrogen-related investments. So thank you for joining me here today, and let's dive right in. So let's speak a bit about the issues and the risks at the beginning. Irina, could you give us a bit of an overview of what kind and where in the supply chains CRMs are needed for hydrogen, and maybe also, how do you see potential risks of shortages evolve to set the scene a bit?
Thank you, Cosima. Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me? So I'll speak before answering your question. I want to set a scene and speak just for 1 minute about steel. I don't know how many of you know that steel is really going to be critical for the energy transition. You require steel for electrical vehicles, for solar panels, for wind towers, just anything in energy transition, just name it. You really will need steel. It's just so fundamental and versatile and prolific material that is absolutely required. As such, it's also infinitely recyclable. So, you can recycle steel, and this is something that we are also quite focused on as part of our decarbonization journey. The issue is currently the way steel is produced results in the significant carbon footprint. If I can ask you, do you guys know how much steel is produced globally annually? Anyone? Someone should know. Any guesses in the audience? No? Come on, guys, guess. No one knows. Petra, do you know?
Go ahead.
So I'll give you the number. Close to 2 billion tons of steel is produced annually in the world. I'll ask you one more question. Do you know how much CO2 is emitted for every ton of steel produced currently? 1 kilo. Slightly more. It's actually, it's 2 tons. Oh, okay. So for 1 ton of steel currently produced, there is 2 tons of CO2 being emitted. So you can do the math. 2 billion tons of steel with the 2 tons of CO2 per ton of steel. So that results in close to 4 billion tons of CO2 as a result of the steel production, which is just below 10% of global CO2 emissions. So this is just to kind of give you the perspective of the challenge we are facing. Nevertheless, we are very much determined as a group to lead the energy transition. We pledged to become carbon neutral by 2050. We have a number of intermediate targets, including reduction of CO2 by 25% globally by 2030 and reduction by 35% in Europe, which again, I just given you the numbers. You should appreciate the absolute numbers behind those objectives. They're really significant. And the good news, technologically, there are ways, and I will speak about 3 ways to fundamentally produce low carbon or zero carbon steel. One, as I mentioned, steel is infinitely recyclable, and therefore I believe that everything that can be recycled should be recycled. And if you use renewable energy as an energy source to recycle your steel, you'll get to a very low carbon footprint. The second one is what we call smart carbon, using the existing facilities, but really finding a way to replace fossil coal with biocarbon or biocoal and leverage CCUS to reduce the carbon emissions. And the third one is innovative DRI. DRI stands for directly reduced iron. Innovative part of it involves hydrogen. So if you use hydrogen to reduce iron ore and not use coal, you can really reduce your carbon footprint in steel. So now I'm just kind of giving you the perspective of the hydrogen role in the steel making. And zooming into your question, the issue is there are a number of challenges around hydrogen use and production, and currently. I normally speak about 2, which is economics and technology. On technology front, like I just mentioned, we are quite positive we'll get there. In addition to the technology pathways that we are developing, we also launched XCarb Innovation Funds that I'm really focused on to identify some of the most disruptive and breakthrough technologies that can support our journey to net zero. And in addition to that, in addition to the fund, in addition to the technology issue, it's really economics. Economics, if you look at the current cost of hydrogen in Europe and where it needs to be to break even for steel, it's a multiple. So we really need to ensure we find the way to get there. But of course, the third issue, and that's the reason we are here today, is the shortage of potential issues around critical raw materials. If you think about critical raw materials, materials such as nickel, cobalt, lithium is really the center of direct electrification and battery revolution. So as such, it's going to be quite a challenge to ensure, and the rise in demand might result in some price volatilities and uncertainties. And hydrogen specifically, it's really around platinum and iridium. So I was actually looking at Bloomberg research on hydrogen and the expected capacity of electrolyzers by 2024, so by the end of next year. And what they show is 70 gigawatts of nameplate capacity is expected to be by the end of 2024. However, the effective capacity is reduced at least by 15% on the account of the critical raw materials. So that's really going to be quite a challenge.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we're going to speak later a bit about how, well, to tackle that, right? But now, Elizabeth, I would like to dive into another risk, and that's geopolitical risks, right? So, I mean, we all know that these are a major factor when we evaluate supply chain security. So could you speak a bit about how you and the IFC would evaluate geopolitical risks in CRM projects, and can they be hedged in some way?
Sure. So I'll take a second to also position myself within the conversation in the World Bank and IFC within this broader event. So I work at IFC, which is International Finance Corporation. It is the private sector arm of the World Bank Group. We invest directly into companies and projects. Alongside, we work very closely with our colleagues at the World Bank to create enabling environments. And I specifically sit within the climate business department. So we work across all sectors, again, private sector in only emerging markets. So naturally, hydrogen has become a growing part of that business. And I think it's not lost on anyone here that the emerging markets are, however you want to describe, areas with high natural resources or renewable sources are essential to places like Europe and Asia to actually decarbonizing using hydrogen for steel and other end uses. So the way that we are kind of approaching the hydrogen, specifically green hydrogen investment area, I suppose, is considering it from a value chain wide approach. So the critical raw materials is just one component of that. Every potential deal or discussion that we have with an existing client or a potential client, we always have very strict due diligence conversations, and we want to make sure that there are essentially 4 requirements met. So whether we're investing in the mining area, which IFC has a very long time, a lot of experience in mining, of course, in real energy. We were some of the first investors in that space. So we have the internal expertise to actually look at the different components, but focusing on critical raw materials. What we look for in a solid project, of course, is a strong partner. We want to make sure that the sponsor has a reputation and also a clear track record of having solid and successful projects, because at the end of the day, we are a development finance institution, but the goal is bankable and profitable projects. So we need to make a return, and that's kind of what separates us, I think, from others, which is, it's pretty exciting place, but I think in new technologies, new sectors can be quite daunting, but that's not for lack of discussions had, and obviously this is a huge topic attracting a lot of attention. So yes, and I think also when you think about a broader hydrogen project, you need to have a long-term off-taker. None of this is new knowledge. I think everybody talks about this a lot. And then I think another piece that's quite important to the conversation about materials is the enabling environment and understanding the incentives and policies and the different tools that you can actually use to de-risk these sorts of investments and activities. We have a couple initiatives that are worth mentioning in this conversation. We have, within IFC, we have our internal hydrogen hub, which is a group of our investment and industry specialists who work together to identify a pipeline of projects and also work to provide what we call upstream, but is pre-business development products, advisory services. So we do more than just the actual investment. We can provide, do feasibility studies or scoping assessments. And a lot of this, as we get deeper into our experience with the green hydrogen value chain, we'll be able to provide more bespoke and useful services. I forgot where I was going with that, but yeah, I think I'll pause there. I don't want to talk too much, but we can get back to it.
Great, yeah, thank you. Petra, so we already mentioned, right, that we have a substantial need to rapidly increase production, so that creates, sort of risks also of inequitable development on the ground where the mining happens. So could you speak a bit about how we can ensure local value creation, and maybe also you can tell us a bit about what UNIDO is doing in the context.
Thanks a lot, Cosima, and big pleasure to be here. Just a few words about UNIDO, and I don't want you to raise your hands if you know UNIDO or not. It's a United Nations Industrial Development Organization. So what we sit in Vienna, we have 172 members, and what we see industrial development, if it's clean and sustainable, is a means of poverty reduction, is a means of job creation. And if you follow a bit the news, you will see that there's a new wave of industrialization, and a lot of being said, industrialization of Africa to create jobs, and we are the organization that is doing this. So why are we entering into hydrogen, green hydrogen? And that was 2 years ago that I set up the program, is that we see it as a means also to drive a new industrial development in the global south. So while we are conscious that it has a means, it has a role to play for the decarbonization of the steel sector, and Irina outlined it quite well. It's 7% of the global CO2 emissions come from steel production. So, and hydrogen, green hydrogen is a means to do this. But then there are then the next step would have to be, so how much of this steel needs to be produced here, or wouldn't it be better to bring it closer to the source of energy? So wouldn't it be better that we split the value chain and say, okay, maybe the raw iron that accounts for 80% of the CO2 emissions along the steel production would be better off if we produce it in the countries where I have the hydrogen produced, let's say South Africa. And that also brings us to the raw materials. If we say we go for a split there, and I don't want to jeopardize any jobs in Europe. It's not about this. It's about really sitting on the table and saying, how can we have a fair deal also for the global south? How could this also empower then the north to produce in a sustainable manner? So in our work, we are working on a model that is green hydrogen industrial clusters, where we are establishing this in the global south, bringing renewable hydrogen, renewable hydrogen production closer to the production of steel, of green ammonia. And by doing so, we are much more efficient, and we're avoiding a lot of CO2 emissions. And mind you, exporting green goods is easier than exporting hydrogen. Just one more issue, and this could be triggered further, that we also could work with African countries saying, can we decarbonize the critical materials, the critical minerals, and then export CO2 neutral platinum from South Africa, for example. And in the just one more, then I pass back. In the clusters, then of course, if you have such a cluster, that also allows you to recuperate the critical materials and don't lose them in a circular economy manner.
Thank you. So that was actually already a lot of opportunities that all of you mentioned, and I would like to go deeper into that. So when we speak about technology opportunities, Irina, could you tell us a bit where you see the biggest potential for innovation, in terms of maybe reducing the input of CRMs for certain hydrogen technologies and so on? And yeah, if you have any specific projects that you have experience with, you could also tell us about that.
Thank you, Cosima. I think this is actually the best part, because everyone's talking about challenges, and there are really so many challenges. We can go endlessly speaking about, regulation, economics, technology, frameworks, raw material supply. But I think we all need to focus on solutions, and I hope that this summit is also critical for this, where we really think, okay, how we address those challenges. On the critical raw material supply, I'll speak about three things. And I think, if you will take away anything, I think those three I would really highlight. One is diversification of supply. I think diversification of supply, because as we mentioned, the raw material come from just a number of countries. So how do we make sure that we don't put the eggs in one basket and diversify? The second one, and it's really my personal favorite, it's circularity, it's circular economy. I spoke about recycling of steel, but equally, I think, to the extent we can recycle and reuse some of those critical raw materials, we must absolutely focus on that. Of course, there are some incremental improvements in efficiency of materials and energy efficiency, but fundamentally, this is something that we should ensure that, there is a proper and sustainable way of the critical raw material supply chain, and it gets recycled in the most efficient way. And then finally, on my favorite subject of technology, as I mentioned before, we launched XCarb Innovation Fund with the objective to accelerate our decarbonization journey and support some of the most game-changing and breakthrough technologies along the value chain. And on hydrogen front, we did a very comprehensive deep dive into a number of technologies, how you can produce green hydrogen. And as a result, we actually made an investment in one of the interesting startups that developing the novel way of producing green hydrogen in a two-step process. So you separate oxygen from hydrogen in a two-step process, and as a result, you don't need a membrane. And as a result, your usage of platinum and iridium is minimized, if not completely eliminated. So, technologies like that can really support our position when it comes to reliance on some of those critical raw materials.
Yeah, I agree that it's really fascinating, everything that's out there.
Maybe just one more point to add. Of course, we are all focused on green hydrogen, but you know that, of course, there is a rainbow there, but I think some of them, like, using blue hydrogen or turquoise hydrogen in the medium term can also be quite useful. So we don't need to wait for the green hydrogen infrastructure to become available. So I think it's not just one solution fits it all. It's a number of things that we need to put together to reduce our reliance on the critical raw materials.
Yeah, but Elizabeth, so starting from that or taking it from that, considering everything that needs to be done, is there enough financing available for all this innovation and R&D?
I think it's an interesting question to ask. There's enough demand to raise the financing. The challenge, I suppose, is kind of getting through that checklist of points that I mentioned a minute ago. There's no reason to kind of pursue an investment if it's not going to have a return, and then it's not going to have the desired impact. I do, however, think that, an organization like IFC and the World Bank is capable of looking at more than just the return. The way that we define a successful project isn't just the return. It's a big piece of it for us, but it's also the additionality. Are we doing something that wasn't going to be done before, particularly in our client countries? And then are we creating value across, a multiple kind of a variety of different impact indicators? So it's job creation, it's ensuring that you're creating an enabling environment for the development of a broader ecosystem. So all of that is to say is that, yes, I think there's plenty of financing out there. I think there's a lot of very eager financing. I think that there's also a lot of nervous financing, though. I think it's early. There's a lot of momentum. There's a lot of energy. But everybody is really kind of waiting to see when pieces will fall together, who will take those first risks. And I have a lot of confidence that it's going to happen. I think I don't really like always leaning against saying we did it with renewable energy, we did it with other climate technologies, we'll do it with green. I think that it will happen, it has to happen, but I think there's a lot of lessons to learn from that experience. But I also think that hydrogen is a pretty unique experience that will require expertise from all these different groups. So you're not just going to need development finance, you're going to need really specialized investors across the value chain to work together.
How do you accelerate for these projects to become bankable, right? So you guys ready to fund it?
Yes, and what we're able to offer also is the blended and concessional finance. That's a big piece of it. Working really hard to do that. Yeah. And I think one more thought that I had that Petra reminded me of actually is that we have a lot of expertise in emerging markets specifically, so we can actually, ideally we're working to develop projects that have a strong local, offtake, ideally is for that local market. I mean, that is also part of the solution, right? It's not just producing to export and decarbonize industrialized nations. It's
Equitable and just transition.
Thank you.
Can I just say something? I think organizations like IFC, DFIs are so important because commercial banks are too risk averse still to investing in hydrogen. So this is really an important work that you're doing, and we have to team up.
So, well, when we dive a bit deeper into concrete policies, there was just recently the EU Critical Raw Materials Act published, right? And so, Petra, how do you see that contributing to, you know, the security of supply chains, of CRMs, and for green hydrogen?
Yeah, so the Critical Minerals Act really has as an aim to ensure that we have sufficient critical materials to produce what we need to produce, be it hydrogen, be it renewable energy materials. I would like to look at it like a partnership approach, because if you want to really ensure a sustainable supply of critical minerals for the global south towards Europe, then you also have to share something. You have to share. It has to be a partnership. It has to be an eye-to-eye partnership. It cannot just be a taken. So this partnership should be there. There should then also be from the European side a consciousness. Okay, how can I partner? What do I need? How can I leave also some value added there? Brings me back to what I mentioned before. So I look at this at the European Critical Minerals Act as a means, at a good. A platform to create new partnerships and to engage in this. I know partnerships is a word that everybody says, but do it. When I started the program, it was clear for me I would not do anything alone. We work with World Bank, we work with Irina, we work with different governments, but we don't do anything alone. So you can also not have a sustainable hydrogen economy, a global one, without partnerships. And I hope that this will be an act.
Thank you. We have a couple of minutes. Are there any questions in the audience? Yes, this gentleman there.
Hello. Thanks for the presentation. Just one small question. Do you consider water one material that is available everywhere?
Sorry, what's the question?
Can you speak
Could you
louder?
repeat it a bit louder?
Yeah.
As water as a material, right? Yeah.
That is the question. Is the water considered a material available everywhere?
I can give like a 2-second response. I think absolutely it is. World Bank also just put out a report last year that looks at materiality of hydrogen, clean hydrogen. Water is a big part of that. I think, however, it's extremely context specific, and from IFC's perspective, you also need to think about the additional costs that you would incur if you had to do desalination or if you had to transport water long distances. So it's part of that checklist that we look through. But Petra?
Yeah, of course, it's part of the checklist. It's not a mineral, but it's one of the key issues. The same as land use. You have to consider land use also when we talk about a sustainable hydrogen market.
Is there anyone else with a question? Otherwise, because we are almost out of time, maybe each of the speakers, because I want to give you the chance to actually wrap up, could say like a very brief sentence about what you think, what you want the audience to take away with as regards the most important opportunity in the CRM for hydrogen context.
I think from my side is, like I said, there is no solution fits it all. There are a number of things, and we should be pursuing all of them in order to really optimally get there. So I would really focus on, like I mentioned, circularity and technology innovation, finding alternative ways, and really pursuing a number of things in parallel in order to get there in the most fastest way.
I think that's also a great answer. I think at the risk of doing everything all at the same time and hoping for the best outcome, I think if we take our time and we're diligent and we share lessons learned, I think partnerships is a big part of it. I mean, it's conversations like this that help us to talk with different sectors and understand the different pieces of a value chain. When we sit in our offices and we only think about what impacts us directly, it can be prohibitive. But I think also, just to mention, the World Bank has a Hydrogen for Development Partnership, which is kind of one way we're trying to do this. It's based on 4 pillars: financing, of course, is one of them. That's where IFC is most involved, but socioeconomic effects of hydrogen, mining, and it's really trying to bring together all those different stakeholders.
Petra, do you have a word?
Yeah, I mean, everything was said really by my wonderful, but partnerships, of course, but then also making sure that whatever we do in hydrogen, we consider this also as part of industrial development. So this is industrial development and climate policies are hand in hand. Some say industrial policy would be a climate policy the industrial policy. So just imagine always, we are not here just for producing hydrogen, we are using it, as Irina said, so, and work together. And more diversification, more women in green hydrogen, of course.
Perfect way to end. Thank you.